Sly Cooper and the Thieves Raccoonus is an awesome game. It's an awesome retro-styled platformer that really shows that you can be stealthy and platform with the best of them. And it did really well for Rising Company's Sucker Punch, so naturally a sequel just had to be made. So in 2004, we were treated to Sly 2, Band of Thieves. And following suit like fellow platformer hero buddies Ratchet and Jack, this second game totally changed the landscape. It took all the elements that were only just starting to blossom in Thieves Raccoonus and completely tore the roof down with Band of Thieves. And in my opinion, this is the best game in the trilogy, by far. And judging from what I see around the interwebs, a lot of others agree. So let's get this started, but of course, before we get to the gameplay, let's start with the story. So, spoilers, at the end of Thieves Raccoonus, you stop Clockwork. Surprise, surprise. In the time between that and the start of this game, Clockwork is still around because his body has now been split up into different parts and are now in the hands of the Claw Gang. A group that's pretty similar to the Fiendish Five, and their plan is to produce and distribute illegal spice, which has the power to give the consumer uncontrollable rage and make them more vulnerable to hypnotism. The Claw Gang consists of Dimitri, the hip, jive, and fat with a PH iguana who is straight up stuck in the 70s, which yes, is as amazing as it sounds. Rajan, a tiger who grew up in the streets selling spices on the black market. The Contessa, a black widow that married and later killed a rich man for his wealth, and eventually gained a position within Interpol where Carmelita works. Jean Basson, the chief transporter of the group who became such after being thawed out from being frozen back in the 1852 gold rush. And lastly, Arpeggio, the leader of the group. It's now up to the Cooper Gang to stop the Claw Gang's illegal spice operation, and get back the Clockwork parts before they all come together and recreate Clockwork's mainframe. And now without a doubt, this story setup is way better than Thieves Raccoonus. For one, each Claw Gang member actually feels like they're part of the same operation, as opposed to just sort of being there on their own. Well, except for Dimitri. He's just sort of there being a dunce. But damn, he's an awesome one. There's also a lot more time you spend with each gang member, making for excellent story progression, but I'll bring that up again in a bit. And of course I'm kinda obligated to not talk about spoilers here, but I will just say that the end of the game is pretty meh. There's actually a pretty good plot twist that happens about halfway through the game that ultimately ends up leading off to a pretty underwhelming finale. But hey, Carmelita is back along with a new partner of sorts with Nayla, and all the romantic comedy picks up right where we left off. And of course, it's better than ever. Wouldn't be a Sly Cooper game without it. And as I said in the review for Thieves Raccoonus, Carmelita's voice is totally different. Now personally, I like this voice actress the most in the trilogy because it sounds the most natural and believable to me, which also seems to be kind of the general consensus. Though any sense of an accent she now had is gone, but it's still a good voice nonetheless. But damn, why would you even do this in the first place? You just can't help but get taken out of the experience if you notice a voice is totally different. I can't say if I would prefer another performance from Sly 1's voice actress over the improvement from Sly 2, but blah, it's just annoying. And it's just even more noticeable since they changed the voice actress again in the sequel. But whatever, I'll just save that until then. There are three huge differences with Band of Thieves. The most glaring difference is the level design. No longer are we given handfuls of linear levels that sorta harken back to Crash Bandicoot, but instead, we're given a total of 8 different chapters, each with a miniature open world to go along with it, and the adventure is purely mission-based now. There are a bunch of different points that'll pop up around the area leading you to different missions of a wide variety, most of the time leading you to different little sub-rooms that act like little mini-levels themselves. It's really similar to Jak 2 in that regard, which also had an open-world mission-based setup. But at least here, with Band of Thieves, the open worlds are at a perfect size that don't make exploring them feel like an absolute chore and borefest. And now I've pissed off the Jak fans, but that's for another time. One other addition is the inclusion of a health bar. Enemies work the same way as before, where as long as you aren't within their little flashlight diameter, you just don't exist. But now you have a bit more leeway when it comes to taking hits, but it really doesn't make the game that much easier. It really isn't that hard to be spotted out in the overworld, because there are still enemies that don't use flashlights. And when you do get spotted, a group of enemies will find their way towards you and will not let up until you run away for a while. Where then enemies will proceed to forget you even exist. Awesome. It can be especially annoying at times because any enemy with a flashlight has the ability to shoot and auto-hit you if you're anywhere near them, making them total pains. This is actually a really smart way to include a health bar while maintaining the need to avoid enemies, so good on them for that. The clue bottles are back too, but here they're scattered around the entire overworld, and I've seen plenty of mixed opinions on this. I have seen plenty of people not really like this so much because they feel like it adds unneeded tedium to exploring, and honestly, like the first game, the powers you receive from these are pretty pointless, but someone like me actually really enjoyed these because it gives you a good enough reason to learn the maps and become one with the atmosphere. You see, I always go for them before I handle any missions, but you do explore the entirety of the map throughout the chapter anyway, and they always make this really ominous tinking noise, so you're bound to find them eventually. That pesky little, where's that last damn collectible feeling, doesn't pop up too often. Thank the stars. The next big alteration to the gameplay is the ability to not only play as Sly, but now as Bentley and Murray as they get proper time in the spotlight. Oh wait, no. Sorry, he is no longer known as Murray. He is now known as the Murray. But for the sake of this review and a bit of my sanity, I'll just call him Murray, alright? But man, what a beast he is. Sly himself still controls pretty much the exact same way he did in Thieves Raccoonus. He still feels incredibly acrobatic and agile, and you can still tap the circle button to do damn near anything, but now Bentley and Murray control totally differently, and rightfully so, because there is no way they can be as agile as Sly. Bentley mainly does his work at a distance, using sleep darts to handle enemies by knocking them out for a short while, leaving you enough time to blow them up on the pass. And Murray is the power hound of the group, so even if and when you get caught, you can just knock the enemies out in a few simple punches, pick them up, and toss them through the air. Each character also has their own fun and unique boss fight, giving each one even more spotlight time. There's also a bunch of different minigames that take place too, like computer hacking with a twin-stick shooter, controlling an RC plane, and plenty more. Now in my review for Thieves Raccoonus, I stated that the different minigames of the sort felt out of place there, but they felt totally fine here. And I'll explain myself in just a bit. Now out of the three, Sly is still clearly the most fun to play, but it's still enjoyable to control the other two. It's not like Spyro 3 Year of the Dragon where the new characters controlled so differently that they just felt forced and kind of obnoxious. The whole game controls similarly enough to where it's still fun throughout. Besides, you play as Sly for like more than 50% of the game anyway. Another interesting element added to the gameplay now is the ability to pickpocket enemies and steal items from the overworld. Something that the first game definitely lacked when it comes to the whole feeling of thievery. By sneaking up behind enemies, you can pick out coins and shiny objects from their pockets, and there are a few special treasures in the world that you can pick up and bring back to your hideout as long as you don't take any damage. All these accumulate to a bunch of coins that you can use to purchase powers for each character. Some of these are mandatory, like a paraglider for Sly, which is incredibly useful. But again, many of these are pretty useless. Like for some reason, Bentley has an item that stuns enemies from afar, which makes absolutely no sense, because you already have the sleep darts, which do the same exact thing. You also have a lot of different powers that will let you charge up attacks, but they're useless too. If you're being surrounded by enemies, charging an attack will not do you much good when you can just smack them, back up, and smack them again. Luckily, these are all purely optional, more so than in Thieves Raccoonus, so again, whatever. The last big change in gameplay is actually in the story progression. In Thieves Raccoonus, the adventure really only consisted of get this guy, it's done. But here, there's actually an overarching story that evolves throughout your adventure. Each episode plays out like a true heist. You start off as Sly, scoping the area and taking reconnaissance pictures, then Bentley will use those pictures to come up with a plan that gives everyone a specific job to do to get things in motion, all culminating to the main operation. And that's actually pretty cool. And that's the reason why I was fine with the minigames. The game makes every mission feel like they play part of a bigger picture, and the minigames are really no different. Not only that, but most of the bosses don't go away in a single chapter. Most of the time, you actually only just mess up a member's plan so bad that they travel to some other part of the world for another chapter. There are also times where not only the boss changes locations, but other events happen at the end of a chapter that directly influence the start of the next. Like for instance, in Chapter 2, you chase Rajan off into the jungle for Chapter 3. And after taking Rajan out at the end of that chapter, something else happens to spark interest in Chapter 4. But of course, that's for you uninformed guys to figure out. I think this is actually really awesome for a platformer. You really don't see this sort of stuff often. Because you know a lot of the times, a boss has an area to call their own and that's it, besides maybe like a boss rush or something. But here, everything feels like that huge cohesive world that really brings this world to life. Which also allows for a lot more freedom for conversation between a large group of characters, making for a great dynamic and characters that you really start to love. And personally, it's these reasons why I love this game so much and think this game is the best in the trilogy, by far. Believe me, I've tried thinking of some negatives and I really can't think of any. The soundtrack is as ambient and sometimes catchy as before, and the graphics are heavily improved, complementing the very natural art style. The only sort of issue that comes to mind is the inability to replay missions, something that was remedied in Sly 3. But personally, I never had the desire to replay individual missions, so this doesn't bother me, but I know it bothers plenty others. And really, that is the only thing I can think about when I talk about negatives. Of course, to each their own, but I couldn't help but just have a great adventure the entire way through. Of course, you're gonna like some missions over some others, but that's not really a problem, that's just a preference thing. To me, this was an awesome adventure from start to finish. Except for the ending again, which is kinda bleh. Sly 2, Band of Thieves is way better than Thieves Raccoonus in every possible way. You finally feel very thiefy this time around. You work with your crew to get your jobs accomplished, which is just cool. And you play in a world that evolves as you play through it, making for a game that's a lot more fun and engaging. The music is great as well, definitely adding some more ambience to the atmosphere. The voice acting, of which there is a ton more of in comparison to the first game, is top notch. All the different sound effects really make this game feel like a living cartoon. And the awesome cel-shaded art style really makes this game pleasing to the eye. I have seen some people not really like this game so much because they feel like it doesn't capture the same magic from the first game, for better or for worse. But personally, I feel like the model in Sly 1 hit its peak. It did enough to where a sequel with only a few little tweaks would just be sort of unnecessary. And when you look at franchises like Ratchet and Jack making pretty big leaps in gameplay for their second game, you can't really blame Sucker Punch for following the trend with open worlds. At the end of the day, Sly 2 is not only my favorite in the trilogy, but one of my favorite 3D platformers of all time. But clearly, we're not done yet. So next time we meet, I'll be taking a look at Sly 3, Honor Among Thieves. Thanks for watching the review, and I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, I'll catch y'all next time.
Show your bling and let me shine you.
I have no idea what you're saying. And your suit sucks.
No! Let's dance!